Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So in this video, I have a very special guest. And let me introduce you to my laptop. Yes, you heard that right. My laptop is a special guest on today's video. And that is because my laptop is going to interview me. So you must be wondering, uh, huh? What? So let me explain for you. You've probably heard of ChatGPT. And therefore, you probably heard of OpenAI, the software developer for ChatGPT. What you may not know is that ChatGPT has an API in the backend. And if you've watched my videos, you probably know that it does. And so I decided, how can I use that API? And so I've seen a lot of people interviewing ChatGPT. Can you be good? Are you going to replace my job? But then the question is, how can I practice job interviewing, or how can you practice job interviewing with that tool? Because it can generate questions, but then it's like, now you need feedback on how you're doing. You can always answer and just type the answer. But I was like, we have to have a better way than this. And so thankfully, I have some knowledge. I can do some Python with a couple lines, probably close to a few hundred. With a couple lines of Python, the script is down in the description, so you can do it yourself. I created a bot that allows me to interview myself for a job. I just have to give it the job description, the number of questions I want to ask, and it will run and it will ask me questions and I will answer them. And it will ask me another question, sometimes related to the answer that I said previously, sometimes not. And then at the end, it will give me feedback on my answers, what went well, what could be improved, and it will also score my response to the answer so I can get an idea of like, hey, this is a strong point, this is a weak point. So without further ado, let's have my computer interview me. Now, a few caveats. This is a beta API, so it's not 100%. I haven't seen bugs yet, but it's not 100%, so take it with a grain of salt. Use it at your own risk. Also, it's not free. The speech generation, the speech recognition, and the questions from OpenAI are all paid services. Now, it's pretty cheap to do that interview. I think it's probably less than $1 to run an interview, but it is a, you know, a very rudimentary AI overall. Also, it's not perfect. Sometimes it will get stuck in rabbit holes and keep asking the same questions over and over again, or it will ask questions in the same field over and over again. But, you know. Hey, Editing Carolyn here. I just wanted to add one thing. I only have less than a second between the question being asked and actually answering it. Now I have a lot of time between me being done and the next question being answered, but I don't have much time between the question being asked and me answering. So that's why sometimes it's a little tough and the answers are very, very rough because I have to come up with them like that. So, yeah. All right, let's start.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm here today to ask some questions as part of the process for hiring a cloud engineer. So, let me start by asking, can you tell me about your experience with cloud engineering and how it makes you an ideal candidate for this role?
Yes, so I've been a cloud engineer for 2, 3 years now. I have done a lot of different projects, from very small projects deploying one resource to very big projects deploying a lot of resources using infrastructure as code in multiple regions using scaling and all that stuff. So I've done a lot of different projects in cloud computing.
What other areas of cloud engineering are you knowledgeable in?
So I am very knowledgeable in infrastructure as code, specifically Terraform. I'm also very knowledgeable in security. I'd like to think that I know enough about security to be able to secure a production environment. Um, I also do identity if we don't roll that into security. And yeah, actually forgot the question.
Question: what do you know about infrastructure as code and cloud security?
So I know a lot about infrastructure as code and how it works, having a DevOps process to deploy all these resources and all that. Uh, with cloud security, I think the infrastructure as code is very helpful because it helps us deploy infrastructure in a secure way, in a repeatably secure way. And if we ever find that there's issues with infrastructure as code, or that there's issues with the security of the infrastructure that's deployed through infrastructure as code, we can easily just address all of these at once. Whereas with a manual process, it's much harder to, one, get an insight into the issues, and two, it's much more difficult to remedy them because there's not already an automated way of controlling your infrastructure. So it would require deploying new solutions to remedy the issue.
Question: how have you employed infrastructure as code and cloud security in a past role?
Yeah, so I've employed infrastructure as code and security in my current role because we have to deploy a lot of resources in a secure way. So you can see it's like going down the rabbit hole of infrastructure as code and security, which is not great. I'm trying to tell it to not repeat the same questions, but
Question: can you tell me more about the specific processes used to ensure cloud security while deploying resources?
yeah. So it's important when you deploy resources in cloud security. Uh, it's really about how you. Let me back up. For us, cloud security with infrastructure as code is about the verification and talking with other people, and then it's all about settings, really, ultimately. So we really verify that everything is good when we deploy things. We have multiple people looking at the same code, looking at what is going to be created and how it's going to be created. So that's a big part. If you do cloud security ahead of deploying resources, you're better off than if you do it after. So we really spend a lot of time doing cloud security ahead of time and not retroactively. Retroactively.
Sorry, I did not get that.
Yep. So we spend a lot of time doing cloud security ahead of time as opposed to after the fact. So instead of doing cloud security by looking at reports and making sure that everything is configured properly, we try to really look ahead of the deployments. The advantage of us doing infrastructure as code is that we can always double check, we can always have verifications and discussions and make sure that the cloud security is taken into consideration before we do any deployments. It's really going down a rabbit hole of security and infrastructure as code. Let's see if it keeps doing that. We may have to re-record a new interview without, with new questions.
Question: what kinds of checks and processes do you typically use to ensure cloud
Cloud security
security
again.
when deploying resources?
Yeah, so we talk a lot about ahead of time security. We do pull requests. We do reviews of code. We do a lot of things like that to really do security. Yeah, it's very annoying because it gets down the security rabbit hole, and it's like, why? I tried to get it to to be penalized every time it asks me questions about the same, security and things like that.
Here is your feedback. For the question: good morning. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm here today to ask some questions as part of the process for hiring a cloud engineer. So, let me start by asking, can you tell me about your experience with cloud engineering and how it makes you an ideal candidate for this role? The feedback is, you did an excellent job responding to this question. You provided relevant and detailed information about your experience with cloud engineering, which is highly specific. Your response also demonstrated that you're familiar with complex concepts such as infrastructure as code, scaling, and multiple regions, all of which will be valuable for the role you've applied for. To improve, try to use concrete examples from past experiences or projects whenever possible so the interviewer can better understand how those skills have translated into successful results. Overall, I would rate your performance for this question a 8 out of 10.
Okay, so I don't want to make you listen to an AI for like the next few minutes. Um, I'm going to put all of this feedback at the end of the video. It's an audio track, so you can listen to it. It's going to be dark, it's going to be boring. Uh, but if you care about the feedback that it's giving me, it is there for you. Now, I'm not going to talk about how I created this bot. I can do another video about this if you're interested. So feel free to ask me in the comments below. Um, but overall, it was, and it's an interesting process interviewing with an AI. The advantage is that even though it goes down rabbit holes, uh, it keeps doing it more or less. So the more you practice interviewing with the AI, the deeper it's going to go into certain rabbit holes. So it is annoying for the one interview to go down the rabbit hole. But the advantage of this is that if you ever have an actual interview, you have gone through all the rabbit holes. You have worked through um, explaining things better. You have worked through all the feedback that the AI is giving you, as good as it may be. Um, and so you get your mind thinking about a lot of these things. For example, for me, because I've developed this software and I've been trying interviewing with it, one thing that came to there was a feedback that I've improved on when I do these interviews again is being able to give clear examples. That's one thing that it keeps telling me. Can you give like a deeper example? And so I know that at the beginning now it's going to ask me about, can you just tell me about yourself? That's really the one that it's really coming up with a lot, and how you're a good fit for the role. And so now when I do these interviews, even though it's not really practice, it's really troubleshooting for me. Um, I now know that when I give my answer, I have to go into details about, you know, the roles. I also have to go into detail about the projects. I have to, elaborate a little bit. And so it's very useful. Um, it's not perfect. Definitely a human will do a much better job. But I think it's good enough to really practice. If you play with it, if you run it yourself, I highly recommend you look at the code and you look at the prompts that I've given it to come up with the feedback and come up with all these you know next questions and all that. Uh, at this point, that's an interesting thing about doing this bot is like it really comes down to how you ask the questions, how you ask the AI the questions so that it will give you something that you want. So for example, I was like, here's a previous question, here's my previous answer, give me the next one. And it went down rabbit holes very fast. Then I was like, here's a previously asked questions, try to come up with something new. And it's a little bit slower of going down a rabbit hole. But then it comes down to engineering the question. Another thing I want to add that's very important. If you translate this text into your language, if you translate the prompts into your language, and if you make sure you change the language from English to whatever your language is, the AI and the speech to text and text to speech um, uh, backend actually understand a lot of languages. So that means that if you want to practice in German or French or Russian or whatever, it will allow you to do these interviews in your own language and not just English. And if you want to practice an interview in English and it's not your main language, you can also do so. So it's a very neat tool. It's not perfect, but it's interesting. So yeah. And before I let you listen to the amazing audio, please subscribe. Right, subscribe. Um, Make sure to like the video. It really helps with the algorithm that you made it this far. You subscribe. You like the video. Share it also if you want to. Um, so
For the question, good morning. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm here today to ask some questions as part of the process for hiring a cloud engineer. So, let me start by asking, can you tell me about your experience with cloud engineering and how it makes you an ideal candidate for this role? The feedback is, you did an excellent job responding to this question. You provided relevant and detailed information about your experience with cloud engineering, which is highly specific. Your response also demonstrated that you're familiar with complex concepts such as infrastructure as code, scaling, and multiple regions, all of which will be valuable for the role you've applied for. To improve, try to use concrete examples from past experiences or projects whenever possible so the interviewer can better understand how those skills have translated into successful results. Overall, I would rate your performance for this question a 8 out of 10. For the question, what other areas of cloud engineering are you knowledgeable in? The feedback is, you did very well in this response by clearly stating the areas of cloud engineering you are knowledgeable in. You will continue to impress the interviewer if you provide examples or illustrations for each area, so that they can better understand what makes you an expert. Overall, I would rate your performance for this question a 9 out of 10. For the question, what do you know about infrastructure as code and cloud security? The feedback is, you did a great job of summarizing your knowledge of DevOps and infrastructure as code. To further strengthen your response, you could provide concrete examples or explain why the automation processes are important for cloud security. Overall, I would rate your performance for this question a 7 out of 10. For the question, how have you employed infrastructure as code and cloud security in a past role? The feedback is, your response was great. You clearly communicated that you have experience in using infrastructure as code and cloud security for a past role. To improve your answer, focus on how you specifically used these technologies to solve problems or increase efficiency within the organization. Additionally, if you can provide an example of one of your successful implementations, it will help solidify why hiring managers should consider bringing into their team. Overall, I would rate your performance for this question a 8 out of 10. For the question, can you tell me more about the specific processes used to ensure cloud security while deploying resources? The feedback is, you did a great job describing the specific processes for cloud security that your team implements. You showed an understanding of the importance of pre-deployment security and how infrastructure as code helps streamline this process. Going forward, it may also be helpful to talk about what measures are taken to ensure ongoing cloud security after resources have been deployed, such as monitoring and deploying patches regularly. Overall, I would rate your performance for this question a 9 out of 10. For the question, what kinds of checks and processes do you typically use to ensure cloud security when deploying resources? The feedback is, you did a great job in your response discussing the different kinds of checks and processes you use when deploying resources. It is clear that security measures are taken ahead of time to ensure cloud safety. To further improve, it would be helpful if you could give specific examples or explain why these methods are effective for cloud security deployment. Overall, I would rate your performance for this question a 8 out of 10.
wow, you've made it this far. You actually listened to all of this. I'm quite impressed. Like, congrats. Um, Thank you. And if you want to watch another video, this one is pretty good. This playlist also is pretty neat. So make sure to click on one of those two. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.